Hello everyone. Welcome to our keynote address for Share Fair. I was just talking to Edwige about how many Share Fairs we've had. We think it's something like 7. And I often am not here because I have to go to this conference called Star Talk right around now. And fortunately, it's not until next week, so I get to be here all day this time. And it's my great pleasure just to be here with you guys, and I have the honor of saying hello and thanking everybody for being here. At the same time, I'm kind of an imposter because I really don't have all that much to do with this at all. The real credit goes to our staff, Courtney Fell, the inimitable, the wonderful Edwige Simon, the fantastic Isla Chanuel. I'm sorry, it's on tape. Oh, and Courtney Malone, I think you know her, and Sante Junker. What a great staff! I'm just so blessed. It's a plum job. I don't know how I landed in this miracle. So thank you all, and then thank you for coming, and thank you for attending all of our FLTP workshops and everything else we do. This is the greatest day of the year for us, and we just hope you enjoy it as much as we do, because I'm having a ball, I know that. It's been great so far. It's going to be, even, the grand finale is still to come, so thank you.
I'm Courtney Fell. I'm running the Foreign Language Technology program now. Edwige was nice enough to hand it over to me. And thank you all so much for coming today. I just wanted to introduce Russell and Nick to you all. Last fall, I was fortunate enough to hear what they're doing over at the International English Center with gamifying learning outcomes using Desire to Learn. How many of you all know of gamification or have heard of gamification in language learning or in learning in general? Okay. Oh, good. Not so many. How many of you all are using Desire to Learn? Okay. So this is a really great talk, not only for us language teachers in the room, but everyone who uses Desire to Learn just kind of take a step back as we're watching this presentation to see how you can kind of approach the learning management system with a new face. Okay. We've all heard, or a lot of us have heard about gamifying and introducing game theory into our courses, and you go to these conferences and everyone talks about these lofty ideas, but this is a real hands-on presentation on how it's being done here at CU in a language course and in Desire to Learn. So thank you all so much for coming. I just wanted to also get off on a slightly more funny note. I emailed Russell and Nick last night to see if they had any last-minute tech requirements or anything, and Russell, I'm going to read your email that you sent back. So Russell says about their presentation today, our presentation is saved on 7 3.5-inch floppy disks and runs best on a Commodore Amiga, through an IBM PC XT running Windows 3.1 with the Esperanto language pack. For projection, we'd prefer a Lanterna Magica with a parallel port, obviously. But again, a Zoetrope or even a Camera Obscura would work in a pinch. And of course, sound shouldn't be an issue as we'll be doing the entire presentation in mime. So, here's Russell Moon and Nick Huntertz from the International English Center.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Russell Moon, the Technology Coordinator at CU's English as a Second Language program. For those of you who don't know what that is, we host a number of international students, and most of these students are not matriculated. They're not CU students yet, but many of them aspire to be either CU students or university students at some other university. Right now we have about 250 students, and we offer what's called an intensive program. So the students come in and they get 20 hours of classes a week, and we do events and activities outside of that. So It's a really great crash course in learning a language. If any of you are ever interested in learning another language really well, probably the best way to do it is to travel abroad and enter into an intensive program overseas, much like ours here. So this talk is called Gamification of Learning Outcomes, which admittedly is vague and probably, or like, what does that mean? We're going to try to explain it. I'm going to try to explain things from the theoretical side, and Nick is the person who's actually been teaching the classes where this stuff has been applied. So he's going to talk to you about the methodology or the practical side of things. So first, real basic overview of the presentation. I'm going to talk about three things, or we're going to talk about three things. The first is gamification, which, as by now you probably know, it has something to do with games. Number two, language, language learning and language. And number three, technology. And so what I'm going to argue is that these three things, these three basic subject areas, are all characterized by the fact that they're ordered in some way, or they're systematic, or there's a framework to each of them. And because of that, because there is a similarity, we can braid the three of them together pretty nicely. So first, what is gamification? Okay, there's this great book by a guy named Carl Kapp who writes all about gamification, and his definition of gamification is using game mechanics to engage people, motivate action, and promote learning. So it's really important to bear in mind that gamification does not mean game. When we gamify a system, what we're doing is we're applying the principles of game design to that system. Now, a game, what we think of as a traditional game like a board game, is certainly gamified, but we can also create, for example, a classroom environment that is gamified, but there's nothing happening that looks like a traditional game. It doesn't look like we're playing a board game or a video game, but still that system is gamified. So the last slide I mentioned these gamification mechanics or principles of good game design. And there are lots and lots of them. I think people who do research on this have named 30 plus. Today we're going to concentrate on 4 of them, and these are 4 of the biggest principles of game design. The first, rules, right? You have to have rules to play a game. Otherwise, it's not a game. It's something else. 2, you have to have goals. A good game, or any game really, has to have a goal. Number 3, you have to have feedback. So there has to be a system in place by which you're getting points, or by which something or someone is tracking your progress in the game towards that goal. And leveling. Now, leveling isn't necessarily an aspect of all games, but certainly all of you recognize leveling as a component of probably the most popular kind of game that's out right now. And this is a broad category, but video games. You level up in video games, right? And this, what we're going to see is that all 4 of these mechanics really increase, or can really increase learner motivation. Excuse me. So, told you a little bit about gamification. That was the first thing on my overview. Second thing was language. So, for what I'm going to do now is give you a really quick crash course in linguistics. Is anyone in here studying linguistics? Okay, good for you. Okay, so the big takeaway here is language is systematic, and the easiest, I have a bunch of stuff written up here, but you can almost safely ignore this and just remember this one point, which is language is more like Legos than finger paint. I'll just let that sink in for a second. Language is what one of my favorite authors, Steven Pinker, is. It's a discrete combinatorial system. Okay, it's discrete because language at all levels is composed of these different parts, and it's combinatorial because what we do is we take these parts and we put them together in different ways, and by putting them together in different ways, we generate different meanings. And a really good example of this is in English we have this word cat and we have this other word bat. Okay, and if we think about it like linguists, each of these words is composed of 3 phones or 3 sounds, and simply by changing the first sound from from k to b, we change the entire expression of that word. We create a new meaning. And we find that language works like this on many different levels, not just the level of word, but also the level of morphology and the level of syntax. So language is very systematic. And to emphasize that point, if you do take a course in linguistics, you'll take courses like phonetics and phonology and morphology and syntax and semantics and pragmatics, and these are the different layers of language. So at the top levels, language it's literally an applied science where we're measuring things with scientific instruments. And as we sort of move up towards word formation and sentence formation, and then meaning, and then discourse analysis, so what happens between people, things get a little bit more abstract. But fundamentally, language is the study of very knowable structures. And so let's take a look at language and gamification. So why are we trying to gamify language learning? Well, it's because the two are, I think, very well suited for each other. And as you can see here in the maroon, rules, goals, feedback, and leveling, I've listed out those game mechanics that I was talking about before. Number one, we know what defines successful language learning. So if you're a language teacher, you know what an A student is, and you know what a B student is, and a C student, and we have rules and rubrics and procedures and assessments for figuring out what is a successful language learner. We have goals in language learning. Whether that goal is learning a list of words or writing a 5-paragraph essay. We have discrete goals that we can point to and say, that's a goal. You have to master this in order to progress. Feedback and what's referred to as formative assessment, that's assessment that you get actually as you're in the class. That's extremely important for any learner, especially for language learning. And then conditional release of new material. When you enter a language class, you start with my first semester university Spanish textbook was called Puntos. Yeah, exactly. That was just 20 years ago. We're still using it. Yeah, I was using Puntos Uno and there's Puntos Dos. So there's already built into language learning this sort of like natural leveling process. Okay, you don't start with Borges before you learn to say me gusta, something. All right, so what about technology in language learning? So I talked about gamification in language learning. Why technology in language learning? Well, technology is, we treat it as a special thing, right? But really, it's just a tool. So like this is technology, right? As much as my MacBook up here. These are both technologies. They're simply tools that we use. So technology really isn't the focus here. In this presentation or with gamification, you don't need technology to make something interesting or to gamify a class. However, it certainly does make it easier. Just like it would be hard to teach a class without a whiteboard, it's hard to do certain things, or it's harder to do certain things without a system like D2L. Before D2L, you actually had to physically submit your paper the morning of the class, but now you can submit your paper at midnight and miss class the next day. And so it's a much better system. And especially with language assessment or with language learning, it really helps a lot with assessment and feedback. Because if you turn an assignment or do an online quiz, the instructor can go in and they can write comments on your paper, and then they can send you that paper right away. And I remember the first time that I received typewritten comments on a piece of paper for an essay that I'd written. Prior to that, I'd always received handwritten comments, and I received like a big chunk of text on a piece of paper, and it had been typed out and printed out on a dot matrix printer, and they tore up the little tabs on the side. And I'm like, oh my, that's the most elaborate feedback I've ever received on a paper, and it's because technology allowed that to happen. They didn't have to, my professor didn't have to sit there and handwrite it. He could just type it out. Okay, so let's bring the three of them together. Technology, language, learning, and gamification. Well, So learning management systems, like D2L, that's the fancy name for them. They're called learning management systems, or LMSs. So D2L is an LMS, you can tell your friends. Learning management systems are suited for gamifying language learning for the following reasons. One, you can clearly present goals for language learning in a learning management system, and Nick is going to show you how that works. You can give people immediate feedback. Because D2L is it's a constrained computer system, we can apply rules to various things, and again, this is something that Nick is going to talk to you about. And I don't know if any of you have experienced this yet in D2L, but there's a system in D2L called release conditions. By show of hands, who knows what that is in D2L? Okay, what release conditions are is once you satisfy a certain objective as defined by the course instructor, you get access to new material. All right, so in a way, it's kind of like leveling in a game. You know, until you get a certain grade on this assignment, or until you get a certain grade in this category of assignments, you can't access this stuff. And simply by withholding things from people, you make them want it even more, even if it's just like boring course curriculum. You know, if you say you can't have it until you do this, you're going to want to do it. Okay. So once again, just to remind you, these are the 4 gamification mechanics we're working with. I did mention earlier that there are other ones that we all know about, like identity and narrative or story, and something called curve of interest, which means as you play the game, you get progressively more and more interested in. These are all good game mechanics too. But again, we're just limiting to the things that we can really do well in D2L, and those are these four mechanics. So let me go through and talk about the mechanics really quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nick. So number 1, rules. One of the reasons gamification works well with language learning is that language learning assessment is well constrained. And what I mean by that is we know what successful language learning looks like. We have all of these things up here in red that sort of let us know whether or not somebody is learning a language well. We have prescriptive rules. These are the kind of rules that you find in a grammar book. We have what's called our native speaker intuition. And so if you're a language teacher who's a native speaker of a language, and a student asks you, why is this like this? You can say, I can't really explain it, but I'm a native speaker of that language, so you just have to believe me. But this is something that's spoken about in linguistics. It's native speaker intuition. Comprehensibility of speech. We understand what somebody is saying, or we don't. Task-based communication. If you give someone a task they have to perform with language, they either perform the task or they can't. We have these rubrics, which are these scoring metrics that we use to score papers. And then finally we have these things called learning outcomes. And learning outcomes is just sort of a fancy way of saying objectives for a class. So if you've ever seen on your syllabus for a class, like in this class you will learn how to do blah, 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 blah. These are learning outcomes. So by the end of this class, you will be able to do these 5 or these 7 very specific things. And that's what we're talking. That's in the title of the presentation, the gamification of learning outcomes. Learning outcomes maps onto this concept of goals that I was talking about before. We have to have goals for something to be gamified. So second mechanic, goals and feedback. We have, in language learning, lots of systems and subsystems and rules and words, lots of discrete things to be mastered. We have an awareness of learning outcomes and feedback. Excuse me. Here we go. So we have many learning, sorry, I missed the second point there. We have many learning outcomes for each skill at each level. And so in our program, we have 7 levels, introductory to advanced 2. And at each of these levels, we have 7 to 10 learning outcomes. So for each class a student takes, they're supposed to walk away from that class having mastered 7 to 10 specific language skills. Okay, and so we have 7 levels, we have 4 skills at each level, and 7 to 10 outcomes per class. So in our program, we have something like 225, 250 individual learning outcomes. Okay, and when you're finished with the program, ideally you have mastered all of those learning outcomes. With using our our learning management system, we can easily show our students what those learning outcomes are, and they can track their progress towards achieving those outcomes. And we also find that goals and feedback really help with teacher motivation, and Nick is going to touch on that a little bit too. So I've been talking a lot about these language learning outcomes. Let me give you a few examples to make things more concrete. We look at the first one, and this is something that might appear on a student's syllabus. Demonstrate comprehension through appropriate response, either oral or written, to the listening materials used in the course. Now, what type of language class what type of skills class would you imagine that learning objective comes up in? Skills include reading, writing, listening, speaking, and grammar.
All of them?
Yeah, actually, that is the correct answer. It's all, but specifically, this would be a learning outcome for a listening and speaking class. But you're absolutely right. This is a skill that would be used in all the classes. And you point out something that's very relevant to this discussion, which is that we're chopping things up into these little discrete categories, and we're almost taking this like clinical approach to assessment and grading. But that's not the only way that learning happens, right? There's also this area of holistic learning, where you take all of these discrete skills that you've mastered, and then there's some sort of magical black box process, and through the application of effort and experience, you actually learn how to do something. What we're talking about here specifically is learning very, very discrete things. And the reason we do that is because as language teachers, we need to be able to track students' progress, especially in a program like ours, where we have 250 students going through 7 different levels. We have to have some way of being able to assess them. So this first outcome is something that you might find in a listening and speaking class. This last one, recognize simple cohesion markers such as coordinating conjunctions and transitions. This is a learning outcome that you might find in a reading class, or in a writing class, or in a listening and speaking class. I believe that this particular outcome comes from a reading class. Produce paragraphs with topic sentence support and concluding sentence. This is something we might find in the writing class. Okay, so this is what I mean by learning outcomes. And for every class, again, a student will have 7 to 10 of these. So, finally, before I turn it over to Nick, this is the last thing I'd like to introduce. When we teach a class, we usually the gradebook usually looks something like this. We have a homework category, and your homework's worth 20%, and your tests are worth 25%, and your projects and papers are, I don't know, maybe they're worth 55%. There are different ways of organizing that. And this has been I think this is the kind of the industry standard. This is what teachers do when they grade a class. What we're proposing here is a slightly different way of looking at the standard gradebook. Instead of using categories like homework, tests, and projects, we're in fact using learning outcomes. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Nick, and he's going to tell you exactly how he pulled all of this together in a real class.
Okay, so considering the slide before this, which you're all probably very familiar with, this, on the other hand, is how we've organized the gradebook in D2L for these classes that we're experimenting with gamification. So the SLO is an acronym short for Student Learning Outcome. This is what we want our students to know. And of course, this is shorthand. So timed writing fluency, I'm sure all of you have taken some form of timed writing test at college level. It is a stressful experience, and we want to prepare our students for that, so that's an important category. editing mechanics and grammar structures. Again, shorthand for a number of different skills that we want our students to have. It's an umbrella classification. Grammatical structures in writing and coherence and word choice, as you can probably tell, this is a writing class. Now, the reason we organize this, the gradebook in this fashion is because we want our students to be aware of the outcomes as opposed to the homework. If you put homework on the front of your syllabus and that becomes the focus, that, as you might agree, is not, it's not a great feeling to see homework emphasized at the front of the syllabus. However, the skills that you're there to learn instead should become the emphasis as far as we're concerned. And so when you see, for example, your gradebook, you would see multiple grades for the same assignment. For example, writing 3. Japan Revealed was a documentary that our students watched. And they had to write an informative essay, basically a summary. Now, coherence and word choice was one of the elements that I was looking for a successful essay. In addition, of course, we all want the grammatical structures in the writing to be up to par as well. So, there's a grammar SLO as a part of the grade. And in fact, this particular assignment, I think there were 4 SLOs associated with this assignment. In addition to grammar and coherence, it was also essay structure, which would have included, a solid introduction with a thesis placed appropriately, etc. And offhand, I don't remember the other one. But as you can see, instead of 1 grade for the paper, a B, an A, this student received an 85% for their coherence, which really has a lot to do with the words that they choose and how they string them together within paragraphs to express particular ideas. On the other hand, for grammar, they received a 90%. The punctuation was adequate, the tenses that they used were appropriate, and the sentence structure was also what I expected it to be, according to this level. Just to kind of get another idea of how this looks. At the bottom of a paper, and the next slide will show a specific example of this. At the bottom of a test or homework assignment or an essay, instead of 1 grade, you will receive a grade for each learning outcome that the teacher is assessing. So again, maybe 75% for number 2, 82 for number 3, 100 for number 5. And the student gets a very clear understanding of how they earned these points. They earned these points because of their grammar, they earned these points because of their coherence, and they maybe did a 65% on learning outcome 6. Maybe somehow they are struggling with word choice. So they can see that very clearly, as opposed to an A or a B, which just gives them a general impression of how well they did, and they don't really know what type of skills they need to work on. So this is at the bottom of an essay. Above the essay, I make a number of comments. These comments are within D2L and Turnitin, which is kind of a software application that is linked with D2L. And so I might highlight some punctuation problems. I'll give them feedback on maybe some critical thinking points. However, at the bottom, this is what they're seeing at the when it comes to point distribution. So, in addition to points, gamification of many games that we're very familiar with, it shows our progress in different ways. If you can imagine Tetris, for example, I assume most of you have at least seen Tetris, you're really scored in 2 ways. You can earn points, and you get points by combining many lines. So if you get a Tetris, 4 lines, then you get a lot of points for that. You also are kept, your progress is also kept track by how many lines you've achieved. So we try to do something similar. In addition to points and grades, D2L allows us to set up a competency system that looks somewhat similar to this, based on a pyramid or triangle shape. And you can see, again, it's the same idea. This particular SLO is the student's performance is a combination of these 3 assignments, and as long as they've satisfactorily completed all of the assignments, they earn credit in the student learning outcome. If they've satisfactorily completed all the student learning outcomes, then they've achieved a passing score for intermediate 1, and they move forward. This is a screenshot from D2L. You can see the assignments and how they're organized underneath each student learning outcome. And then, of course, at the top, we see I3W, which means intermediate 3 writing. So we don't have a screenshot for this particular, for the student view. However, what the student sees on the right-hand side is actually a series of green check marks, which, as you can probably imagine, are a positive sign. It means that they have achieved a passing score in this particular essay or homework assignment. Or the student will receive this menacing red X, which nobody wants to see, and that means that they have not achieved a passing score and that they somehow need to work harder to achieve a passing score in that particular category. Okay, so this is an interesting, D2L allows teachers through the analytics portal to track student usage. And some of our students find this somewhat invasive, but at the same time, they also seem to understand. One of them even, one of the more advanced students even said something like, "This is 1984, isn't it?" And I, I'm not ashamed to say, well, yes, I'm keeping track of pretty much everything you do. So what this is the number of times that students access their grades in a 7-week period. Now, the reason this is important to a teacher, and especially for our perspective on gamification, is that some students check once a week, if that. And there's nothing wrong with that. However, some students, as you can see right here, 27 times in a 7-week period. In this particular case, we have a student who is very much interested in what their grade is. Why? That's up to them. What we're seeing, however, is that there is a wide range of what students want when it comes to access to feedback and when it comes to access to their progress. So if you're in a traditional class and you receive a midterm grade and a final grade, it's pretty apparent that for some students, in fact maybe even most students, this is not enough. We need to be consistently providing feedback and letting students know of their progress. And really, as far as I'm concerned, especially after applying gamification in the classroom, I feel like that's pretty much my main job, is to provide feedback.
This is from an alternative learning management system called Blackboard, and we threw this in there just to show that you can do this type of gamification in other LMSs. But I think we're going to skip past this because we're a D2L group.
Yeah. Because Blackboard sucks.
and because
yeah, we forgot to put that in there. So leveling. This, as you heard Russell discuss earlier, this has to do with the release conditions on D2L, which is a way for us to kind of introduce new content to students if they've achieved a certain percentage on an SLO or on an assignment. The LMS, D2L allows for content to be released in the condition of previous achievement, and you can attach this achievement to a number of different assignments or even to passing one of the SLOs. And there's strong internal motivation to unlock the next level. As Russell mentioned, students really, or really any of us, not just students, but anyone wants to know what's behind the door. Whether it's exciting or not, we just want to know. And this also is very helpful from a teaching perspective regarding scaffolding and flow. Scaffolding, if you're not familiar, is this concept of kind of slowly building a student's confidence and skills to the point where they're able to achieve success in more difficult tasks. And flow is actually a concept based on positive psychology that we're very interested in, and gamification kind of borrows from. And this is the idea that if you're challenged too much and the challenge is too great, then you will develop a certain amount of anxiety and frustration. And if you're not challenged enough, then you kind of fall into the realm of boredom. And what we're looking for, and what everybody is looking for, ideally, is to be in between the two. and that we are in fact fully motivated at that point. We're not bored, we're not anxious, but we're being challenged just right. And all of us, in essence, are searching for that in our lives. Not just in a game or in a classroom, but really in anything we do. We want an optimal experience. So, this is a pretty good example, or this is the example of two, of release conditions and leveling. I don't know why some of you are laughing, but I could probably guess. I've called them secret projects, and what this is if a student achieves a particular learning objective, then they've unlocked the content behind project number 3. Secret project number 3. Secret's an important part of this. Now, what's behind this is more work. That's what's behind door number 3. It's just more work. I will say, however, though, in an attempt to kind of informally leverage some of the other game mechanics, these are a little bit more interesting and fun than some of the average classwork that a student might encounter throughout the session. So, for example, I think behind Secret Project 3 for this session was the OK Go video with the giant Rube Goldberg machine. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that. It's a fascinating YouTube video. Really just a huge Rube Goldberg machine that took them a quarter of a year to construct. And students had to watch that and then use a series of verb tenses to describe what was happening. These were progressive verb tenses because so much of what was happening in the video was happening in time and continuing. So it was very appropriate for that particular skill, using those verb tenses. Secret Project 4, I think, was like the battle at Kruger, which is if you're into nature, like, Animal Planet, that type of thing. It was this really notorious battle on YouTube. It was captured in South Africa between a lion, crocodiles, and some water buffalo. So again, the content is more interesting. It's not something you're going to encounter in your average language classroom. And students were motivated by nature of the secret, and students were motivated, especially after uncovering the first project, because they knew behind the door was something just a little bit more intriguing.
This is more Blackboard
Yeah,
stuff.
student.
Still Blackboard.
Still Blackboard. Still going. There we go. So when you unlock a secret project, this is something you might see. I'm using Comic Sans, which is kind of, it's a cliche for fun, right? But here is an example, and again, we have a YouTube video in conjunction with this particular project. You can see the tenses are emphasized here in the directions, and just so that you can see how that works. Now, in addition to secret projects, our students can also access video games. Now, these video games are not Pac-Man and Tetris. These video games are very much related to the skills that they need to learn for academic success. Even our advanced students, whose language skills are impressive. In fact, grammatically speaking, they might be even more aware of grammatical structures than native speakers of English. However, many of them come from language backgrounds that use different characters. Japanese, Russian, Korean, and what that does to them is it really inhibits their abilities on the keyboard. It might seem like a small thing to us, but to them, a 13-page paper might take twice as long. So some of these games might help test their ability to type. Speed typing games, some of them may be reading games. Fantasy Quest is like this kind of simple adventure game, but it requires them to pay a lot of attention to instruction and direction, which is another skill that we definitely want them to focus on. And I might even, at certain points in the class, hold an in-class tournament. So what that does is it encourages students to practice these games at home. And so when they come into the classroom and they're competing against one another, they feel a little bit of pride. I've been practicing this all session. I accessed this early on. How about you? A little bit of competition. It's healthy, I promise. But it really does also convey a sense of community to everyone because they all have the same goals in mind. Just an example of the directions again. I have some colors, some fun, and a link to the game. Okay, so number of times students access the content of the LMS. Similar to the grades, students access content at different rates. This particular student only accessed the content 5 times. Now, this is a hybrid course. This is not a fully online course. They don't need to access the content online. They can come to class. You can see right here, grade item progress. They've completed all of their assignments. This student is still progressing well. However, this particular student accessed 172 times. Now, my guess is that part of that inflated number is because they went on and practiced the games so often. In fact, I pretty much know who this is, and that was the case. They went on for the games. But still, you can see that access to content, not just in class, but online and from home, is very important to some students, and some of you, I'm sure, as opposed to others who just don't need it. So some of the feedback we got from students, they found it useful to see how assignments connect with outcomes. This is incredibly important to us. They are able to see at any given moment why they're failing, or why they're succeeding, or why they're struggling. Developed a more comprehensive and specific understanding of their skills, very much related to point 1. Better understood the purpose of assignments. And this is great from my perspective and from any teacher's perspective, because it means less explanation. Appreciated the opportunity to try and fail without consequence. I didn't get much into this, but some of my teaching philosophies have changed because of this. One of them is late work. I tend to accept it more. The reason I tend to accept it more is because all of the content is here. What they need to know is here, online, and always accessible. So I don't have. It's not a lot of extra effort on my part to allow them to keep trying. It's all already presented to them. We had an informal survey using the Likert scale, which we're going to continue to use. But some of the questions include, did knowing about the student learning outcomes for this class help you improve specific writing skills? Did seeing your SLO grades on each writing assignment help you to understand what you needed to do in order to receive a good grade for the whole class? And as you can see, the majority of the responses were very positive, which we're happy to see. This is very preliminary, however, and we understand that. More samples is going to equate to more validity, and we hope that continues to happen. Feedback from my perspective, as a grader, as a teacher, it kept me honest. Now what I mean by that is not that I'm lying, but it kept me thorough. At any given moment, I had to look at all of these different SLOs. It's really important to my administration that the SLOs are the focus of everything I do, and everything that the students do as well. So as I grade, the SLOs are always there in my mind. There's not a rubric that's an intermediary between my assessment and the student learning outcomes. Instead, we're just using the student learning outcomes as the rubric. All of the criteria that you might see in the rubric is directly related to the SLOs. Its adherence to departmental standards kind of goes unspoken. The SLOs are defined by our department, and I'm using them consistently. And it's recorded and shown easily that I am using them. Easy to justify assessment. A student comes up to me and asks me, why did I get this grade? It doesn't happen very often, to be honest with you. With all of this feedback, it's clear to them. They get it. And they don't question my perspective as often, partly because they know what I expect, and partly because they know everybody else is in the same boat. All of their other fellow students are receiving the same type of feedback. This is a really important element as far as I'm concerned. Communal classroom for effective gamification. For students to, in a sense, buy into this and really find the SLOs important, they have to encourage each other. It can't just come from me. For the teachers out there, I'm sure you realize this, it's not just an authoritative position that we hold up there. In fact, it should be more of a facilitating position that we hold. And developing a classroom community is a integral part of getting students to look at one another and say, oh, are you buying into this? Okay, well, you know what? I like you like me, we're kind of in the same boat here. We're on the same path towards success, or in some cases, struggling. Grading, it's time consuming. There is no getting around that. It really is. I have to think a lot more when I'm grading. It's a double-edged sword. It takes more time, can be cumbersome at times, but the benefits outweigh it, no question. That's just my perspective. That's not necessarily going to be the perspective of every teacher. Novel grading process and student awareness, this is a challenge because I'm the only teacher at the IUC grading in this fashion. So I have to basically reorient my students to this, not reorient them, orient them in the first place to this grading process. It's not just an A or a B. It takes a little bit of reminder. I see a potential for more leveling and needed to encourage intrinsic motivation. I think that access to assignments and content, we could somehow be leveraging the leveling mechanic of games a little bit more. We're not exactly sure how to do that in a hybrid course, but we're exploring. And subtle teacher encouragement. Sometimes I just put the SLOs up on the board, the competency systems up on the board, and I'll just kind of talk about them in general. I don't have to say, hey, look, these are the competencies, pay attention. But instead, I just kind of remind them every once in a while so that they stay on track. And with that, I will pass the baton to Russell for some more theoretical justification.
So just a few more conclusions. They just put an incredible amount of work into implementing all of this in its classes. Excuse me. There's this really great book called Reality's Broken. It's by a researcher named Jane McGonigal, who is a Berkeley PhD, and she's one of the leading figures in gamifying things to make them more interesting and motivating. And I really like this quote from her book. Work that's intrinsically rewarding, so things that we're just motivated to do, not because of some sort of external goal, but because we're motivated by some type of internal impulse. These things require goals. You have to have a really clear goal, so you have to know what you're doing. You have to have actionable next steps, so you have to know what steps you take to get to those goals. And you have to be receiving feedback, and that feedback has to be pretty immediate. So in order to be internally motivated by something, not just a class, but by anything, like you're going to find these things in place. And here I have a few more justifications regarding motivation and goals, and also motivation and agency. So when you have some choice in what you're doing, it's more motivating. And in our system, the students have some agency, especially when they're choosing like the secret projects. I think that one of the broader things going on here is that we need to recognize that games make us happy, or games motivate us because they're hard work, or they're interesting hard work. The games are interesting hard work that we choose for ourselves. And so when we can reframe the work that somebody does in a class as interesting, goal-driven, leveled hard work, then this work becomes more interesting, especially when we have that choice piece in there, where they have the option to maybe in some way choose their own educational path. Nick touched on this idea before, the importance of low consequence failure. When we're playing a video game or a board game or any type of game, if we fail, we're not going to get kicked out of school. We're not going to suffer the wrath of our peers or our parents. We're not going to lose our job. Failure is kind of expected in a game. And one of the things that motivates people to keep coming back to games again and again is that failure does not come with really bad consequences. This is spoken about a lot in gamification literature, but it's something that we're interested in incorporating more and more in our classes. We don't want the only student's motivating element to be that final grade in the class, because if you fail that, you fail the whole class, and that's not a good situation to be in. So, education is already sort of gamified. We're already progressing through this system that's leveled, and we get feedback and grades. But that narrative of our progress through education it's pretty heavy. You know, if we fail, if we don't do well in high school, we're not going to get into university. If we don't do well in university and get good grades, we're not going to get into grad school. If we don't get into the right grad school, we're not going to get a good job, and we're going to be poor and homeless, and there you go. So there is a narrative. What we'd like to try to do is take that big narrative of going through the educational process and bring it down to earth, so that we can participate in something without having the consequences be really huge. And so in the future, I think what we'd like to do with this system is create something like a virtual online community where students have something like an avatar. And as they progress through the class, they level up this avatar. And I'm not talking about something like WoW or Minecraft. I'm talking about maybe a virtual community space where language students can get together and talk about things. And the higher you level up, maybe the greater your capacity to communicate. So you start off at like Twitter level of communication, and then as you move up, you're able to write sentences and paragraphs. So there are different ways to create virtual communities and virtual identities. So kind of like a world that doesn't have the same kind of weight and consequence as the quote-unquote real world does. Just very quickly, a couple of takeaways. I just want to focus on this last one about things like D2L. When we're using something like D2L, which is a really complicated system, there are all of these, there are approaches and activities that aren't immediately apparent when we start using the system. D2L is very feature-rich, and there's lots of stuff you can do with it. But these new approaches like gamification they kind of emerge from the system when we start using these features, start combining them in interesting ways. And so that's, I think there are more things that as educators that we can do with D2L. It just, but we won't know until we start putting things together in new ways. So if you are interested in knowing more, or if you would like access to this PowerPoint, I'm not sure how many people we have in the class who are in the presentation who have smart devices. But if you do have a smart device right now, we'd like to ask you all to go to this URL. If you just open the browser, you can be a computer or your phone or a tablet or whatever, just type this into your browser bar. You don't need http://. This is a shortened link. And make sure the W here is capitalized. So put that in, and it's going to take you to a 3-question survey. And it looks like just about everybody's doing it. So you only have to answer the first 2 questions on the survey. The third one is requesting questions for us. And if you don't teach the second question is about teaching classes. If you don't teach a class, you can just put no. They won't hurt our feelings. Great, and it looks like everybody is close to finishing. So it looks like more than 50% of you have actually done that, which means that I will unlock the presentation for you. So for those of you who are interested in this PowerPoint can be accessed publicly at this link. That's a capital O, not a 0. That's a capital O. Yeah, it's a no. So you can find the presentation there, and you are very welcome to contact either me or Nick. His email is John. But you can contact me or Nick at either of these email addresses if you have more questions. And I think what we're going to do now is we're going to open it up to questions if you would like to continue the conversation a little bit more.
Thank you.
Thank you.